I've always had a deadly phobia of spiders. Arachnophobia, it's called. When I was 6, I went to a school whose playground beneath the bright yellow slide had a little spider web. It was small and it went unnoticed by almost everyone, but me. I couldn't ignore them because every spring the spiders would come out from underneath the playground right when I often collected dandelions. They'd always appear with the dandelions, and they never failed to terrify the living hell out of me every single time. Maybe it was because I was always alone during that time that no one else saw the spiders. I guess that also made it scarier. It wasn't much fun being alone during recess, tormented by spiders, and while the spiders were bad enough, the loneliness was worse. And for reasons I didn't quite understand, I thought I was a pretty nice kid. I was shy, so I didn't talk much, but that's how I knew that it wasn't because I was loud or annoying that people didn't talk to me. I'd always wondered why the kids stared at me the way they did and why they always wanted to touch the puff atop my head when I came to school like it were some foreign object. It was just my hair. It had confused me, isolated me. It got pretty damn annoying, I'll be quite honest. The number of times that I was asked if I spoke African, or why my hair was so wild, or why when I got mad I was acting so ghetto, became like an irritating bug bite. I was about 8 when it was brought to my attention by a couple of students that it was the color of my skin that made them treat me the way they did. Who would have thought? They were pretty upfront with it, to be quite honest, stating, well, you look different from us, Deborah, and your hair's weird. Or something along those lines. That, amongst other obvious factors, was what let me know that what I experienced back when I was a kid was a form of racism. This discrimination I faced in elementary school and middle school, and still today, torments the lives of every single Black person and is one of the root yet unnoticeable forms of the systemic and institutionalized racism that is embedded within every aspect of our lives. Not just elementary school, not just the playground. It's everywhere. You see, it was those recesses that introduced me to the two things I fear most, spiders and racism. And so I've always subconsciously and ironically aligned my experiences with spiders. An odd relation, I know, but when one thinks about it, it's not quite as far off as you would expect. Both are pretty terrifying, and both caused some of my worst days on the elementary school playgrounds. Though I'd say racism is much worse than spiders. Additionally, racism is a complex and intricate system, like a spider web, for example. This complex system has a core, radii, and many spiraling twists and turns of thread, and the ability to grow with daunting speed, like a spider web. At its core, racism is a form of discrimination that functions on the idea that inferiority and superiority are based on skin color. The spiraling twists and turns of racism are the mechanisms that have allowed this belief to spread throughout influential aspects of our society, like the thread of a spider web, letting the web grow throughout a house. Over history, slavery, lynching, the Jim Crow era, mass incarceration, and systemic racism, amongst many other things, have allowed racism to continue to evolve and adapt throughout the changes of our society, making it inescapable for the Black community. And lastly, the radii, the stabilizing component of every spider web, the aspect that allows the web to not only stand, but to continue to grow. Without the radii, a web would simply fall apart. It would have no power, no ability to spread. The radii of racism are microaggressions. Microaggression, micro, the prefix coming from the Greek word mikro, meaning small, and aggression, meaning hostile or violent behavior or attitudes towards another. Readiness to attack or confront. So, small, hostile behavior, readiness to attack. Imagine, for example, you are walking through a grocery store and you want to buy chocolate chip cookies. And the moment you enter, all eyes land on you. Women clutch their purses, store owners stare you down, and children turn their heads almost immediately. You are isolated. You are dehumanized, immediately placed into the blinded box of perception. This happens all the time. I mean, I've seen it time and time again when I go grocery shopping with my brother. Though not directly violent, microaggressions are small, yet incessant. They aren't just one-time occurrences, but often everyday interactions. They happen over and over and over and over again. They are, in better words, the everyday subtle yet intentional and oftentimes unintentional interactions or behaviors that communicate a bias towards historically marginalized groups. You see, microaggressions, I believe, act as the rat eye of racism because they allow for quick and easy transference of the biases and stereotypes that have caused racism to thrive. The stereotypes that I'm talking about in relation to Black people were originally arranged to create a racial hierarchy and acted as an explanation for why Black people always seem to be at the bottom of that hierarchy, or, and I quote, just above apes and monkeys. Carl Linnaeus was one of the first infamous scientists of the 1700s to classify humanity into races and to rank such races. His rankings of race always had Black people at the bottom. With every revision he made to his research came another hierarchy where Black people found themselves at the bottom. Oh, and he justified this through creating descriptions for each race. For example, Europeus or European was described as white, sanguine, muscular, wise, and inventors, while Africanus or African was described as Black, phlegmatic, lazy, sluggish, and neglectful. I'm sure that says enough. His descriptions illustrate how the ideas of race and the stereotypes behind each race were created by historical social ideals that the superiority was based on the color of somebody's skin. His ideals pioneered the stereotypes we see today, stereotypes that are communicated through microaggressions. Once these stereotypes were believed, they found their way into society, and they inevitably shifted the attitude amongst members of society towards Black people. And then discrimination in the form of microaggressions, for example, began to occur, after which came systemic approaches, and like I said earlier, the other spiraling twists and turns of racism. Microaggressions allow for these stereotypes of Carl Linnaeus to continue to live within our society, only furthering the projection of these damaging beliefs that were embodied by many scientists. Microaggressions, since the time of Carl Linnaeus, have caused Black people to be repeatedly dismissed and alienated and insulted and invalidated. The result of these subtle, snarky remarks and the isolation they cause can be seen in society today. It's in the daunting suicide rate of Black teenagers, which is 9.8% compared to the 6.8% rate amongst white students, according to Medical News Today. Some of those who have acted on these biases and furthered the impact of microaggressions have caused the deaths of countless Black men and women. Let me rephrase. Microaggressions kill. They killed Trayvon Martin and Tatiana Jefferson. These murders were committed on the basis of a stereotype attached to their appearance. As I mentioned before, these types of comments, this type of treatment, is due to intentional and oftentimes unintentional behaviors that communicate a bias. So yes, many of those interactions that I had when I was 6 were unintentional. Some of those kids most likely didn't realize that asking me why I spoke so white was necessarily a bad thing. And many people do it unintentionally. You may have once as well. I have too. That scientist, Carl Linnaeus, assigned almost every single race other than European with those degrading and racist traits. And his studies, amongst many other people's studies, have influenced society for a pretty long time. So long that they've become normal, unnoticeable, unintentional. What I wish those kids in my elementary school would have known is how those comments were because they were stuck on noticing my differences. They were trained to notice my differences. What I've actually found out is that if a person differs from us in any obvious way, our brain registers this, and this happens instantly. And sometimes we are unable to understand this difference. And in the society we live in today, we are taught to fear this difference, to defend ourselves against it, to isolate it, to shame it. Like when the woman grabbed her purse in the grocery store when my brother and I walked in. What I wish I could have told those kids on my elementary school playground was that they were stuck. Getting unstuck is the goal, and while it may be difficult, it is possible. Firstly, try and notice what you notice. Take the time to realize what you might instantly think or assume about a person, and wonder and think, are those fair to that person? Then, think about the reasoning as to why you are thinking this way. Question your beliefs. Why might you instantly assume this trait is related to this person simply because of their appearance? Maybe it's because you were taught to think this way all your life by your parents or maybe your friends or even teachers. Maybe you've seen it portrayed on TV or in movies. The systems of our society have embedded it everywhere. So these beliefs could have sprouted from a simple book you read as a kid. Then make an effort to stop yourself from acting on these beliefs, which will help you slowly erase them completely. Try putting yourselves in the shoes of that person that you're interacting with, and take the time to understand their perspective. And be a good listener. If someone tries to tell you that something you might have said might have offended them, then listen. And finally, understand the impact of your words. Like I mentioned before, microaggressions allow racism to spread, and without individual action in preventing the use of microaggressions, we will not get any further in our goals of reversing the history of oppression and discrimination against different marginalized communities. Through understanding the contribution of our words to the web of racism, each and every one of us can help destroy the rat eye of racism and contribute to the destruction of this daunting web of society. Oh, and the last thing I wish I could have told those kids from my school was that they were pretty lucky to not have to deal with those damn spiders underneath the bright yellow slide like I still do, all the time.